Let's go tonight and start with create tools for healing and reconciliation, D. So I'm going to take all of D and move it over there. And we're just going to take these one at a time. So, okay.
Hold on, I gotta. Technology, I'll tell you. There we go.
I think you're doing great.
Yeah, we're fascinated. So
I'm
don't
impressed.
worry, Lauren.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's like I just think of what it's taking and where you're sitting and where all the rest of us are sitting, and I just am going agog.
There we go.
Yes. Okay. Now, refocus the mental health industry to become strong where we are broken. And then let's see if we can do, there's 4 parts to this in terms of the data that came out of our conversation. So we're going to see if we can see that and or have Jim read it for us.
And I think I can read that off as well as paste it into the chat. So
okay.
We have, it's going into the chat. We have add coping skills through education and ... build interior strength, redesign healthcare and therapy approach.
Okay. So where do you start to think about, what do you start to think about when we look at this? Refocus the mental health industry.
I'm reading
I think it's in the cultural.
Okay. And maybe even before we get there, just when you said that, what were you thinking, Alan? I mean, what comes to mind with the mental health industry? Refocus that.
This Jim, I'm reading a novel right now called Bewilderment by Richard Powers. It's a wonderful book. And this fellow is an astrobiologist studying the stars, and his kid's having trouble in school, and everybody wants to put him on drugs. So I think about, and as opposed to having him learn how to meditate and control his own brainwaves. Anyway, so to me, that's the struggle, and also the whole business of trauma, that whatever that means and how that affects people. And is trauma real, or do you just say, well, be strong and get over it? To me, that's not clear. So, but that's for me all what's in this refocus the mental health industry. I'm complete.
Okay.
Evelyn's
Evelyn? So to follow up on Alan, was thinking it was culture, and then Jane.
What I see this, it says strong where we are broken. So I'm curious about where we are. What was the sentiment around where we are broken?
Oh, I was there when we said that. I think that was my team. Or whoever. But the point was, many of us are broken through with regards to our mental health. And it's not, well, go ahead.
I remember the first time I ever went to Hawaii for a wedding for someone, and we went to some place to have coffee, and there was a man in the bathroom who was not well. I mean, he was basically, what it boils down to is there was a health center at the top of a hill, and they closed it.
Maya!
And all the people
Alexa.
who were in that center, who were psychologically ill or had struggles emotionally, were basically soldiers who had different types of syndromes. And they just let them loose all over Hawaii.
Mhm.
And so when we discovered that that's what happened, and we were talking to the woman who was behind the counter, and she said, I know he's sick, and I know that we have no structures to take care of all of these men and women who have served us in the armed forces, but they let them go, and they're not taking care of them. And when you get up in the morning, if you come at 6 a.m. in the morning, and they clear the beaches with these big machines that make the sand all smooth and beautiful and remove all of the refuse, and then they have to move, and then they have no place to wash. So then they come to our place and buy 1 cup of coffee and basically bathe in the bathroom of a public restaurant. And she said, it's not fair to us on the staff because we got to go and clean it up afterwards. And I
Okay.
thought, this is, how broken are we as a nation that we don't even take care of people who are really sick, and
Okay.
they don't have a way to be cared for. So when I was looking at the triangle, it has something to do with, it's under corporate welfare, called secure existence.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
was wondering about that too, Evelyn.
That was my thought.
Well, and it's also a part of that was strong where we are broken. And how one of the places where the mental health is with people who are in environmental trauma and or in the indigenous trauma of the last 200-300 years. And how do those begin to be, without saying this is a magic button, you know, how do those become places where we can also be strong? And it's the Japanese understanding of the broken pot that it can be mended in a beautiful healing way. And so that moving forward, how do we have people that the children, I mean, up here in Canada, they talk about the children traumatized from the 2 years, you know, that's going to be another area. So the recognition. So Ellen, you had put it into culture. So I was wondering where in culture you saw that.
Well, I was kind of struggling. I kind of think it has something to do with social structures, and maybe maybe accumulated knowledge about, you know, now even the, well, it's not a cyclical role really, but it's I can see the secure existence, and that in that political arena, it seems like it doesn't fit as well for me, put it that way.
One of my struggles is I've not found where health at all is clear. in the triangles.
Yeah, me too.
And it's kind of a big deal. But apparently in 71, it wasn't such a big deal.
Well, there's a curiosity about is this a matter of restructuring, which would put it more in the political, I think, or is it more of applying resources, which could put it under human resources, under economic commonality? Or is it more a matter of, there was a whole thing on homelessness in LA today that I heard on NPR yesterday. And I mean, it just, thousands of people are homeless on the streets. Evelyn, like the example you were giving in Hawaii, is it a matter of our values? Where would values come in? Would they be under communal wisdom or final meanings?
And I also want to interject, this is an answer to the question, what will it take to release large amounts of human energy? So it's not simply a matter of refocus mental health industry to deal with the people it hasn't been caring for. It has to do with the 3 million refugees from the Ukraine and the other folks, and what's going to be the mental health burden on people when they have to move out of Arizona because there's no water. That's going to be it's a whole different. I mean, just think about the pandemic and how and what's happened to healthcare workers and other frontline workers in the midst of that. So I think a dimension also is this, it's not just individual care, it's dealing with the whole scope of this. By the way, community health is under, I was just looking here, it's under corporate welfare, secure existence, primal substance. It's way down there. It's a foundational pole of physical preservation under primal subsistence, which is the left-hand triangle of secure existence, for whatever that means. But
under the communal wisdom final meanings, if you go down one more level, there's also social morality, ultimate concerns. And part of this was, I forget who, if it was Thomas More wrote, we've had 100 years of therapy and not much has changed.
Yeah.
So what does good mental health? And I'm wondering about the word industry as our title there, that maybe it isn't, it's how to deal with mental health and not just leave it in the categories, but lots of different things. Okay, well.
I have one other thing. I think there are two components to this. I think there's a structural part, but there's also, I think, an understanding of the structural part has to do with our responsibility for taking care of things. But there, I think there's also an interior quality of this that is about how do I, what does mental health mean? I mean, how do I know if I'm mentally healthy? I mean, you just mentioned that story about the book where they wanted to put the kid on drugs. They determined he was not healthy. Maybe they were wrong. So what is our understanding of what overall good health is?
Yes.
I'm complete.
Good. Okay. Well, this is not to get a final answer, but to have this kind of exploration. So I think That's been a good one. Any last comment before we shift? Okay, let's bring up D2. Replace structural oppression with equity and collective action. So replace structural oppression. What comes to mind when we think of structural oppression?
Systems, policies, organizational charts, laws.
Mm.
The caste system in the many places around the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All parts of that. Okay. So replacing that with a sense of equity and collective action. Let's read the four parts. Lauren or Jim. That are part of
Enable
it.
global access,
Okay.
work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and help societies to heal.
I'll paste that in the chat. Sorry, I was looking on the triangle.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. This is getting a lot of play, isn't it, in terms of what's been left from in this continent and in the Caribbean from slavery was a structural oppression. Also, I remember the first time I heard about payment. It took several times to get my mind around that, but it was like, yes, you know, what does that look like? Up here in Canada, we're doing those that were in residential schools, those that were scooped, stolen from their communities, literally, you know. One of the ways of trying to have equity and collective action is through some of the legislation and payment. Doesn't at all change the situation, but I know I've worked with a few of my Indigenous colleagues and how they've been able to use that funding to kind of get on a different footing.
Mm.
It would be collective action.
Well, I know a lot of the study that Catherine and I have been doing indicates that the legal base is got a lot of that structural oppression built into it.
Okay, yeah.
I have a question on this one of collective action. I'm reading a book called The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu. It's part of our Buddhist book study group. And throughout the book, there's a very great emphasis on community, that we are interconnected with this larger community and we define ourselves in relationship to it. While at the same time, we are alone. And I'm wondering if that changes if it's in community action. There's something about collective action that's very seems assertive to me, issue-oriented, versus community action, which may be more about building community.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mhm.
Although I feel fairly strongly that to replace structural oppression, it's going to take collective assertive action.
Mhm.
I'm just looking at the three little pieces under it. Yeah, I think you're right, Sunny. Work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, help societies heal.
That's more the community side, I would think.
Yeah.
To build resilience.
Yes.
Mm.
And to build capacity for a truer form of community. I don't know where. So part of that would be the legal aspect, and part of it would be, I forget what final meanings is about, but even common religion.
We could bring in the cultural triangle that takes it down one more.
Well, I would try to respond to Jen's idea about a collective action. I thought the term collective action might be a little bit, simplify the process of dancing between self-accomplishment and community consensus. Yes. So maybe that we need to address both. That means self-accomplishment for demonstrate power, and also love to be interconnected. So that maybe constitute the more comprehensive idea of justice.
After listening to the US hearings on our Supreme Court nominee, I feel like we've got such a long ways to go. And the legal, there's something more, I don't know, there's just something that has to do with how we make meaning, what we value.
I think for me, I think that this structural oppression, equity, collective action, I'm thinking of Black Lives Matter, but I'm also thinking of indigenous oppression around the world. And so it's definitely political issue. It's definitely economic issue. And for me, I don't have an answer, but that tells me, or I would guess that it is mostly a cultural issue that's acted out in the economic and the political. Just a thought. I'm complete.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think about that manufacturing of caste system, that book where she laid that out, how we have manufactured those kind of divisions. We've manufactured the structural oppression over centuries. I mean, we talk about 1,000 years in the future, but that's 1,000 years in the past that some of those structures were laid out and are ongoing. Yeah.
Just to make sure that I didn't miss anything, I have these little stickies that I'm putting on the triangle. Are there triangles that we've already identified that I need to make sure that I've flagged? I was trying to listen and think.
I think based on Jane's comment and on Alan's comment, that down there under corporate justice, legislative consensus, the seeming, of course, I think in our society, in the US, this has to get done by laws. And so that's legislative consensus. But then somebody was also saying, that you run up against our legislature, it seems like they're sort of paralyzed these days in actually doing something. So I think the next one, that's deepen our emotional competency to unlearn and relearn. That's the aspect that gets at maybe gets at more the deeper cultural dimensions of this whole piece.
Okay.
There's one thought I have that I'd like to explore as I begin to immerse myself. I'm wondering if under common distribution, property claims, we're talking about denied potential for wealth growth because land, well, first of all, was stolen, And then the claims on it have almost always excluded any person of color. And if they've managed to gain property, various ways to take it from them. So.
That's interesting, Catherine. I'm thinking about the Amazon and how the land is being sold off for cattle and for sugarcane and destroying the rainforest. There's no collective sense of common distribution. It's who's the strongest can get the most.
Well, in those cultures in which there was absolutely no concept on how you own the earth, have been, and that includes pretty much worldwide. I think Robin Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass brings that forward in a very powerful way. To support what you're saying, Jane. Yeah.
There was one on this triangle before property claims, the one before that, anticipated needs. Sort of an interesting living standards. Operative philosophies under inclusive equilibriums. Now I've forgotten what we're working on, but like this fits a little bit.
The structural oppression, yes, and replace it. How do we begin to replace that? Okay, well, let's.
I do think inclusive equilibriums is a good one.
And, you know, Jane, you brought up for me when you were talking about the taking over of land in the Amazon, the misunderstanding of the connectedness of things. That yes, there are those who want to take that land and raise their products and make their money off of it, and not realizing that as you destroy the Amazon, you're destroying the foundational capacity of people to breathe.
Yeah.
It's like there's some connections here that people are not grokking, so to speak.
Well,
Cindy, that's kind of what I was thinking when I say it's ultimately it's a cultural issue. I mean, you don't recognize that you're killing yourself.
Yeah.
Your mythology, your story about life and about connectedness and how you're part of things is so broken that you don't even know what you're doing. And that's for me, it's cultural and complete.
Well, and that's a cultural triangle and under economic too, Alan.
Good point. Excellent point.
So they're kind of connecting in together there.
Yeah, I think the top triangle in each one of these points toward cultural.
Yep.
okay.
So let me just ask, if we're going to release human energy by replacing structural oppression with equity and collective action, is that fundamentally going to get done by the economic or the political or the cultural? And don't go into blocks and all that sort of thing, which is a little bit where we got to. Is that?
Not sure how it would happen. It might come out of some other triangle, but it feels like what has to happen is immediately it would be in the political.
And is it, and if that would be, that's kind of what I was feeling, but all these other dots are really important in terms of what it would take for the political to happen. And I don't know, that whole point about, inventing private property, which is sort of economic, but really it ended up being legally mandated that people could own private property. I don't know if it's more there or more in that legislative consensus, but this is. Anyway, thank you.
One of the things that I was thinking of, talking about how you're going to make that political change, I'm remembering what Theodore Roosevelt said, you got to hold my feet to the fire. And one of the things that happens, like in the civil rights movement, is you've got hundreds and thousands of people on the street, and you don't see that now. We have more, well, I don't know more, but we've got so many issues. We've got COVID, we've got the war in Ukraine, on and on and on. And politicians are doing less and less, and they're not going to do it unless they get lots of people. A small demonstration is good, but large numbers of people on the street is what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and interesting, the politicians are not making change. Who's making change in Canada are the lawyers. And they talked, the community I'm part of talked about sending their brightest kids to law school to get into the courts and to fight. And they are, after 100 years, beginning to win the cases on land claims, because it's all there in the treaties, and they just have to create the arguments. And so huge change happening legally with the results of the land claims in the community that I've been working with. So that was an interesting, that's one of the place changes coming, yeah.
Is that happening in conjunction though with just general cultural awareness of what has happened and kind of community, that critical mass of community support and buy-in for making that change or that restoration?
Yes, it's beginning, but it was, I mean, some of these have been 30 and 40 years. They've been working at this, the land claims. One that just, the Cold Water Treaty just got resolved, and they've been working 40 years. So probably some linkage, I mean, definitely linkage to the rest of society waking up to the injustice that has happened, but in conjunction with the legal forces.
I want to just insert a short piece of history of the Cherokee Nation was highly educated, and they fought being removed from their land successfully all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won. And then Andrew Jackson just said, put them on the train. So I'm just saying, sometimes the law is not the final answer here. I'm not against sending people to, I think lawyers are very important, but the bottom line issue is not always the law. It has to do with somebody's inclusive myth, something. I'm thinking.
Yes. And maybe that's where the most powerful action could be taken. If we look at what Jan just said, it would be somewhere under the political dynamic, going over to the economic commonality of common distribution. But how do we have that happen? Lauren was saying mass numbers of people getting out and advocating for something. That has to do with cultural commonality and a belief in something, that inclusive myth that you talked about. So maybe that's a triangle that will have the most impact for action.
Good.
I know we already have under political commonality and corporate welfare, we have put secure existence in there for this, but it would seem like, first I thought maybe it has to do with political freedoms, which has to do with loyal opposition, citizen rights, and individual liberties. But as you were talking about going to school and having lawyers, having the next generation become lawyers, it seems like it has to do more with significant engagement above corporate welfare, expressed conscience, knowledge access, and meaningful involvement. So that significant engagement is really, I would think, I remember my dad went back to school after he was 55 because he discovered all these opportunities in the GI Bill that he never took advantage of. And while he was there, he discovered he could buy a better house because he could use the GI Bill to do it. And so he and his cronies decided, okay, well, let's see if they will allow me to apply this. And he fought in World War II for the Americans in Europe, and he got it. And so it was sort of like, wow, there is power in knowledge. You know, it's a whole different perspective when you look at knowledge access in a whole new way. I mean, I remember when I was in East Dallas in Texas years and years ago, that there was redlining going on in East Dallas, and a group called Acorn started up and was talking to people and going door to door, and I thought, and there's something we can do about the redlining. And they said to me, how did you get to East Dallas? You don't qualify under these current criteria. And I said, oh, we rented from a church who had a building next door, and there was this big apartment. And so that's how we ended up being in that location. And so she said, oh, that's how you did it. You went through a church. Anyway, wisdom, knowledge and wisdom.
So I'm beginning to, as I'm listening to our conversation, I'm wondering, is this really replacing structural oppression with equity and collective action? Is this really something that we're gonna do to release energy to take on the changes? Or is this one of the major changes that we have to figure out how to release energy for? I mean,
think it's the latter.
Dwayne Elgin in his book, pointed out that if we're going to mount a movement for a great transformation dealing with all these things, we've got to find ways to build some reconciliation among the different genders and groups of people that are being affected by all this, so that we don't waste our energy fighting with one another. Not that that's not an important fight, but maybe this really isn't an answer. Maybe this is really more of an answer to the question, what's one of the major changes we've got to deal with over the rest of the century, rather than what's something we can do that's going to release the energy for those changes.
Yes, a chicken and an egg, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of both.
And it's probably both. Both and instead of either or. Well, let's continue with the last two in this column and then step back also and see what it's telling us. So bring in the third one, D3. Deepen our emotional competency to unlearn and then relearn.
I'm just trying to make these things smaller so that you can hopefully identify which ones we're working with as we're working with them.
Yes,
it works.
So the aspects of this, the 4 aspects of this.
Dropping those in the chat now.
Okay.
Skills for,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope. Okay. Skills for emotional and social navigation. Make space for introspection and grieving. Truth telling and accountability, and cultivate compassion, ? don't know why there's a question mark in there, but cultivate compassion.
Mm.
Those seem to be in communal wisdom.
Mhm.
How so, Jane?
Well, there's useful skills. So something like meditation or developing compassion seem to me to fit somewhat into useful skills. Accumulated knowledge, so that it's a collective, not just an individual thing. And then final meanings, the significance piece.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't know if it's communal systems where common religion, and religion is an off-putting word there for me.
Yes.
If it were common beliefs, but
Under common religion, I have inclusive myths instead of useful skills, unifying icons, which is the same, and common rights, but this one has societal paradigms, which I like better. And under, I was thinking that social art speaks to the emotional part of the context that we're talking about also. In other words, radical projection, interior awareness, eventful consciousness. So how do we unlearn or relearn if we haven't been emotionally addressed? I mean, why would you go deal with political freedoms if you don't in your heart feel that something has to change? And social art can also be movies, or they can be not just pictorial things. They can be songs and dances and many, many different aspects.
Mm-hmm.
True. That's very true.
yeah, there's lots of definite connectivity there, all of these.
But I like the useful skills. How else do we relearn if we don't have a way to figure out what to do and how to do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Rather than dealing with stuff like what do they call it? No, they use this term emotional intelligence.
Intelligence.
So
Yeah.
rather than dealing with as something woo-woo or deep or profound or whatever like that, it's just something we got to get better at.
Yes.
Broadly, and many of us to be able to unlearn and relearn. So we're not screaming about how terrible it is that we now know X, Y, or Z about our history, but we're going, okay, yep, that's deepening it and move on. So it kind of speaks to me, that useful skills thing.
Could someone speak to where they see truth telling and accountability? I mean, is that just a skill? Is it a
Was that the social art also sounded like it might have some of more on an interior level, maybe Sunny, than an extra. There were some things in there I didn't understand.
Maybe it has to do with the final meanings above communal wisdom, ultimate concern, individual integrity, and social morality.
Mm-hmm.
Truth telling.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does fit right there.
And the whole individual integrity is part of that final meaning. And it's also, oh, shoot. It's part of leadership. I mean,
Mhm.
and the emotional intelligence is a key part of leadership, is what they continually find. And so in some of our work, we introduce that emotional intelligence parts, which came out of the work Gardner was doing on multiple intelligence. And how, so that was a direct outcome of that work. So, yeah.
And also observe the political meaning in it, because if the people are telling the truth and their story being appreciated, and then they will have some kinds of equality of expression, their own thoughts and life experience. So are there any parts though related to political commonality could represent?
That's a good question. Yeah.
A lot of my background is in group dynamics, and this conversation seems to be focused in a way predominantly on the individual, but I'm thinking more about social structures, the early work on the Tavistock on group dynamics, and how a group forms its personality, its intelligence, and each person has a part in that. I don't know if that's what you were getting to, and I'm sorry if I don't say your name. Yahoo? Yeah.
Yahweh.
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 Yahweh. Yeah, if you were getting to more of it when your comment about political, but for me, people are, it's a phrase I haven't been able to track down, but it's called subsystem mirroring, where each person each person mirrors sort of the organization personality, and then the organization itself is a subsystem mirroring of a larger system. And so for me, deepening it's a plural. It kind of points to me to group. So I offer that. I have no idea quite where it fits, if social structures are part of it. It's also political for me, but that's partly also that.
So maybe we are structured in the social structures.
Yes, yes.
what I read from your interpretation. Thank you for your idea.
I'm complete with my wandering there.
Okay. Well, let's go to the fourth one. And then I want to step back and be able to look at.
I need to excuse myself. This has been terrific, and I hope to be with you again.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan.
Keep it up.
Hi, Alan.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Alan.
See you next time.
Yeah, take care.
Yes.
And just as a time check, really. Sorry, go ahead, Lauren. Other Lauren.
I was just saying I have to go too.
Oh,
So it's been interesting.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just as a time check, we have about 20 or so minutes left on the originally scheduled time. So people are getting ready to head off to do something else. We are rounding out here with this last one. So this one's easy, Jan. This is recovering our capacity, or recover our human capacity for change.
Yes.
And the depth of this is in the chat. capacity for humans to change. That's the only one we have rolling up.
It's the only one that's there? Okay.
It's the only one that rolled up.
There were 4 items from the original pilot brainstorms: belief in human capability to change, belief in human capacity to change, demonstrate capacity for human change, and mass media for image change.
Okay.
But
Yeah, very similar.
they didn't seem like they fit in any of these others here. I remember about a week ago being in a conversation and somebody brought up reading a book about brain science that suggested really our brains were designed to keep us from changing. And then you also hear about ongoing, what do they call it, plasticity?
Yes.
Neuroplasticity.
Of change. And then of
Neuroplasticity.
course, in our world, we've got this whole idea of image change. So it's kind of to me, it's kind of like is there a human capacity? Is there a human capacity for change? Are we, as a species, are we up to how life is going to be different? Or are we just kind of stuck in how we do things and going to become obsolete? What's the right answer, anybody?
I would suggest that we have competing systems internally. So if we look at the amygdala and the limbic system, that's safety, security, control, don't change anything on me, don't move my cheese, all of that. But then we have this whole entire mammalian brain as sort of a balance to that. And that's where the ability, if there's a will, I think that's a huge question. We're seeing in a division in our political scene here in the US between a tremendous backlash to any change because it's so upsetting to the primitive system. So that's my contribution to your question, Jim. My contribution.
Well, but then that also goes to that when you move that to the level of groups, it can be kind of amazing. Lauren was sharing a video on the history of improvisational theater and how good human beings are if a group is pretending this, to jump into that kind of way of pretending or pretending that. And right now we're pretending we're all upset and offended. But as soon as earbuds came out, all of a sudden we were all using earbuds. So to me, there's a part of this human capacity for change that also comes in at the level of choosing among the social options that are available.
I wonder if some of that is our from our dinosaur brain stems, our FOMO, our fear of missing out. So we're learning new stuff just so we don't get left behind. And my other thought was, as the climate crisis increases, are we going to get into situations where the fight or fright is going to be elevated in how people operate?
Yeah. Well, and it goes back somewhat to our creation mythologies. And to understand, are we, or the evolutionary nature of who we are, is that possible? Or were we put on this planet and that's the way we have to stay, But it's having that story about our capacity to grow. And I think that's linked then in the political, there's a category which I hadn't seen called executive authority. But what are our key political people saying? How is that linked with our inclusive mythologies up there in the culture? What's, you know, a lot of our political leaders are advertising fear. And so fear does not promote growth at all. So it's, those are two that would be in dialogue. Yeah.
What was the other one, Jan? And cultural, where was it?
The common religion, and then part of that is inclusive myth. I agree with the word religion, but so if you look into the three dynamics of religion, you get.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, useful skills, unifying icons, and common rights. Is that right?
Yeah. You know that
one more down.
Stone. Oh, okay. There you go.
Sorry.
Yeah, inclusive myths. And then you got your archetypes. You know, who are we looking at in terms of growth archetypes? The ability to grow. Those are some key ways, I think, of releasing energy is actually, to go to Jim's other question. I mean, all of these have to be shifted or grown in terms of releasing the ability to release energy.
I think we have an incredible example of this happening with Ukraine and with the migration into Poland, Moldova, Hungary, Romania. We've had hundreds of thousands of people move into other countries who've had very isolationist borders in many ways. So it's and welcoming people into their homes. It's, and people saying, I'm leaving the country I'm living in which I have a life. There was something that has happened with adaptation. I wondered about the wording on this. Is it recover? That is really, or release our human capacity for change, or develop our human capacity for change.
Increase.
Enhance.
Yeah, increase, enhance, or something.
The big answer to this question, or the big answer was create tools for healing and reconciliation. And so recovering our capacity to change, it has to do is one dimension of those tools for.
To begin to, That's
then
helpful.
does it come back over into useful skills?
Yes.
Does it also not address social structures, which have and communal styles, above communal styles, community groupings, social aggregation, and basic roles?
Is that within social structures?
That's within cultural commonality, communal styles, social structures is above that.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to quickly, Jim brought it back. Lauren, we said we'd bring the title of the whole column back into play also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's bring that, because that was, all of these fit under this one. And maybe we should in the future start with that. I don't know, but.
Oh,
come on. You can't move it for some reason.
It's okay, just, it can stay. It's in the right place. That all of these were 4 examples of the create tools for healing and reconciliation.
Well, there are 4, you have to say like 4 sub answers.
4 sub answers, thank you.
I mean.
We're learning the vocabulary of this. I'm thinking of, this probably hasn't made news anywhere else in the world, but there's a delegation of 30 indigenous people going to visit with the Pope next week to try to have him address the decision made 500 years ago that was encoded in the Papa Bull, which said indigenous people were not human.
Oh,
Yeah. Talk about a legal structure that has been in place. It has still not been rescinded by the Catholic Church. It is still in one of their laws, legal, whatever legal a Papa Bull is, Papul, Bull. And so
Papal maybe,
probably
papal bull,
papal
coming
bull.
from the Pope,
Yes, from the Pope. Thank
which
you.
would probably mean that it's got a good chance to be rescinded by Francis.
It's the best hope in the last
Yeah.
500 years, probably. But he's not doing it. He's been asked for 3 years and he's not doing it.
oh,
And he's not doing an apology at this point. His statement is he wants it to be not just words, but an action. So we'll see. But it's a drama that is happening. I mean, like I said, it was, I think it's 500 years. It was after Columbus went and started discovering new lands for Europe, and this is something they created as they went out exploring, which gave them permission then to take. Don't get me started. Okay, so anyway, it's a pregnant moment of possibility.
So these legal challenges is a tool for healing and reconciliation. These reconciliation commissions, I think that got started in South Africa, didn't it?
Yes, South Africa.
Isn't that another kind of tool?
Yep.
For healing and reconciliation?
Mm-hmm.
Which one was that, Jim?
The reconciliation, it's D itself.
Oh, okay. I thought I missed.
If I could suggest, many feel that the word reconciliation is misleading. It assumes that there was something there to begin with, and then we are reconciling to it. So among a number of different arenas, one of which is conflict transformation, it's conciliation. And then I'm also wondering about reparations. That is a massive actual political movement for change. And I'm not quite sure where that might fit in with our overall discussion. There's so much richness around it.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of a big thing under that D2, isn't it? Replace structural oppression with equity and collective action. And put that in the context of climate emergency and you know, it's the US that keeps saying we can't deal with it, because as a country we know we're hugely responsible. And how are we going to, and it's going to cost us. Same thing, our own unwillingness to be a part of any of the international court systems, because we're not willing to have our people be charged as war criminals when they kill people.
Mm-hmm.
Really quickly, I think it was Catherine. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen, but I think you had mentioned political, but I see a common distribution connection to, well, we're going back to D2, sorry. Maybe not, maybe this is also D4. As you drill down, you see property control, equitable return,
Mhm, mhm.
Although I'm guessing that return had to do with ROI, not
That,
returning
yeah,
land.
that's true. I'm reading what I wanted to say, but I still do see there being, maybe not for D4, but for D in general, this top triangle
Mhm.
is strong for me.
Yeah.
Well, looking at everything now, D1, 2, 3, 4 in this title, what does this begin to tell us, or what are you aware of? To begin releasing human energy. What lights up or insights you have on this, the tools, healing, reconciliation, or conciliation?
One thought that occurs to me is that in order to move forward to release energy, there has to be some kind of equity and healing and reconciliation. That seems like an underlying assumption or value. So if we didn't heal and we didn't reconcile, we wouldn't be able to do these other things.
Mm.
And it's interesting, we have most in the cultural, the next largest is the political, and there's a few in the economic, which is sort of, I think, the opposite of the ones we did last week,
Mm-hmm.
or different than, not opposite.
I'm going to try to pull that all together really quickly, just so we can see. Hopefully my mouse will cooperate with me.
I do think that the creative tools for healing and reconciliation also is under the economic, under common resource, under natural resources, as well as human resources.
Which one was that?
Okay, under economic, and then go to common resources, and then natural resources, which is accessory improvements, basic reserves, and ecological flows. And then I thought, and that will only happen if human resources are intact, employable skills, resident population, and labor division. So I felt like it needs to be in human resources, and it needs to be, so this is D4 we're talking, no, D, just
Just
D.
D in general. Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, so it would be natural resources and human resources.
Just kind of put that one here.
Yeah,
bridging.
and the, yeah.
And